We should be. Okay, I think we are. Welcome everyone to another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. I'm Zamith, your host, and before we get going with today's guest, I just want to let you know that you can ask questions on chat or either on Twitter if you use this hashtag Subvisual Talks, and you can ask our guests some questions. Without further ado, I'm gonna send it to you, Aaron. Hi.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
All good, all good. Um, so for those that don't know you, and I'm sure there's few people here that came for me. I think most of them definitely came for you. Uh, can you give a quick intro into who you are and
Yeah,
what you do?
sure. My name is Aaron Patterson. I'm probably better known on the internet as Tenderlove. I'm a Ruby developer and a Rails developer. I'm on the Ruby core team and also the Rails core team, and I've been doing Ruby and Rails development for um, quite a while, since maybe like 2006 or so. So yeah, I've been doing development work for a long time. I've been on the Ruby core team for 10 years and also the Rails core team for about the same amount of time.
Cool. And before we get going with anything else, I gotta ask about the handler. So last week we had Fred, whose handler on Twitter is just F, which is funny, but yours is also pretty funny on its own right. So why did you choose Tenderlove?
Well, I guess there's two reasons basically. The first one is like it was just a joke among my friends. Like one of my friends was like, "Oh, what is the worst thing a guy can say to you?" And she said, "Oh, tender love." And I'm like, "Oh my god, it's so funny." So I made a website and I sent it to her and we post like she laughed and we posted a lot of photos and stuff. But the other reason, so if you go look at some of my really old blog posts,
Hmm.
it's basically just me and my like photos of me and my friends hanging out. But uh, the reason I like kept it in the development community is because like basically around that time, in that time, like early 2000s, I guess, people were very. I think a lot of developers online were very like serious. So many people were using like you would do development in IRC and stuff. Like a lot of
Hmm.
chats happen in IRC, and most people's handles in there were like I don't know, like
Business Bob, something
cool,
like that.
yeah, like cool guy or like like I don't know, zero cool. That I know that's from hackers. I can't remember any real examples, but I thought that they were like way too serious. So I was like, no, I'm gonna do something ridiculous instead.
How do
So
you
that's why I did it.
how do you feel about? Because I'm sure people approach you not knowing your real name. Does that happen?
Yes, it does. Yes, one time I was on an airplane and I was like flying to a conference or something, and um, this guy is like walking down the aisle, and like he sees me and I can see that he recognizes me, and he leans in and he's like, "You're Tender Love," and I'm like, "Oh God," because there are other people in the row too. I'm like,
Right.
"Oh yes, that's me. Good to see you."
Uh, the choices you make in life, right?
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so usually the first question I ask everyone is, how did you get started in this? So how do you get started with either programming, technology? What really ignited your passion for it?
Uh, hmm. So I guess like my mom is an electrical engineer. Well, was she just recently retired?
Hmm.
But basically that's kind of how I got my start, like being interested in technology and stuff. Like we had it around the house a lot, and um, both of my parents are engineers, so they would just like show me different stuff, and I think that that's where I first got it. Actually, when I was in grade school, maybe I don't know, third grade or so. Um, I had asked my parents like, "Hey, can you teach me how to do secret codes? Like, I want to know how to write secret codes to my friends." And they're like, "Okay, we'll teach you binary." So they taught me binary. And I thought it was really, really awesome, but I couldn't convince any of my other friends at school to
Right.
use it.
I can
But
understand
that's
that.
yeah, that's I think basically my parents is where I got my interest in technology. I didn't know though, like as far as like becoming a programmer and stuff, I didn't know that I would like being a programmer until I started doing it. Like I got my first programming job at when I was 19, like right when I was done with high school. I basically started doing it to pay for college.
Hmm.
I didn't even know if I would really like it at the time, but that's when I got my very first job was
And that was the first time you programmed as well, or had you had some experience with any language before, like other
I
than
mean, I had
binary?
we had in grade school we did some basic programming. I think in maybe sixth grade or so we did some basic programming, but I wasn't super interested in it. In high school we did like C++ programming, and I have to admit I wasn't super interested in that either at the time. Like
Hmm.
I didn't really care. So I had some experience with it, but I didn't understand like how this could be a job or how it could be an interesting job, right?
Right. And so that first job that you got was then how you really got into programming? What made you decide? Was it just a job that was paying well? Was that like the reason you got in at first?
Yeah, yeah, like basically, so I was trying to figure out how I'd pay for college, and I knew I wanted to get a job, or I knew I needed a job, but I wanted like I don't know. I knew I didn't want to work in like food service because I had done that. I had done that in high school, and I knew it wasn't for me.
Hmm.
And a friend of mine recommended me to. He was like, "Hey, I'm doing this. Why don't you come? Come join us." So I decided to do that, and it paid pretty well, and they were fairly flexible with hours. Um, and I guess like after a while of doing that is when I realized like, oh, this is actually a good job. Like I like doing this. Or
What what language was it that you were using at the time?
I was a Perl programmer. I have to say
Mm-hmm.
like I can't say that I liked doing it. I was like, okay, this is a good job,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like it's a good place to work, a good environment. Like I think I could do this for a living, but I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it, or I don't think that it was like something I really wanted to do, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But yeah, I was a Perl programmer. Um, just like a quick background of my language history. I
Mm-hmm.
started out as a Perl programmer. I moved on from Perl programming to be a Java programmer. While I was a Java programmer, I learned about Ruby, and then I became a Ruby programmer, and I've been a Ruby programmer ever since. So that's
Right.
though I also do. I mean, everybody like it's
Yeah.
really weird to say I'm a Ruby programmer because I programmed so many languages. Like it's not
But
just the one.
you actually implement the core of Ruby, so you're a Ruby programmer in that sense.
Yes, I'm a Ruby programmer and a Ruby programmer. Yes.
Um, we can go into that a little bit. So we were talking beforehand that you're obviously very like a prominent figure in the open source community, particularly Ruby and Rails. You've been contributing to both for a large number of years. One thing that I find fascinating, I think, is that you've been able to consistently work for those while changing companies. Like you've been going through different companies while being able to do open source, which is not that common, I think. So what do you think made it possible for you?
Hmm. Well, let's start with how I got started in open
Yes.
source. Uh, So I got started doing open source stuff. I've been interested in open source programming. Like I think my very first open source commit was in 2001 or something. But that was with Perl libraries. Uh, but when I got serious about doing it, it's because I didn't like my job. So I would slack off at work, and the way I would slack, like I really enjoyed programming, and the way I would slack off at work is I would just like write open source. I was like, I'm gonna write some open source stuff. I'm not gonna do what my boss tells me. I'm just gonna do open source stuff because like boss sees I'm doing some programming. Oh, he must be doing his job.
Makes sense.
So I would do that. And I think that that's kind of like stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay, it's stuck with me, but I've been more, I guess, more honest with my managers and team that I'm like, this is what I want to work on and this is what I'm going to do. So that's kind of like I did it and then it evolved into a job eventually, and that's how I was able to do that through like through my career
Yeah.
basically.
Do you remember which projects did or which major project you started contributing to? Like, what was the first
Um,
thing?
hmm. Let's see. The first thing, well, mm,
I mean, surely you contributed to many different projects, but like the thing that was really the initiator of your like this is my open source career starting.
no Kogiri for sure.
Mm.
I'm sorry about the install times. Think of when it's slow to install. Think about me, please. Just like send kind words to me.
But that was a project that you started on your own, or was it part of?
Yeah, it like basically at the time. So I'll tell you how that project got started. Back at that time, there was a few different things. First off, we needed to do at my job, we needed to do XML processing, and we also needed to do some HTML processing. And basically, we found at the time the tools that were available were either not like they didn't correct broken HTML well enough, or they didn't parse fast enough. So that's basically where I got started doing that particular library. But some of my very first open source like Ruby libraries were essentially just the language. So uh, like I said, I used to be a Perl programmer, and what I would do is to learn Ruby. Basically, what I did is I would take Perl libraries that I used and then just like port them into Ruby. So I was like, oh, this is a good way for me to, good way for me to learn the language. And then on top of that, I'm like, well, also these packages don't exist in the like Ruby world, so I'll just, release them. So that's kind of how I got started doing a lot of the libraries that I published.
And at that time, so you're saying you said you started with Ruby in 2006 or contributing to Ruby in
Uh, I,
2006?
No, so let's see. My very first Ruby library was published in 2006. I
Mm.
think I got my first Ruby job in 2008. I think maybe it may be 2007, around that around that
Mm.
time. Um, let's see. Published it then. I first committed to the core, or I first joined the Ruby core team in 2008, I think.
Hmm. So
Okay.
uh, how and so so you joined the Ruby core team before you joined the Rails core team, right? So
Yes, that's right.
how was that? So you're saying you're coming from Perl, and then you're doing some Ruby libraries, which I'm assuming mostly in Ruby, even though Nokogiri has some C extensions. Uh,
Yeah.
how was it the transition to Ruby core, which I know is something that's to this day is hard for a lot of Ruby developers because Ruby being written in C makes it sometimes a hard transition.
Yeah, I think when I first started contributing to Ruby, I wasn't working on like super hard internal stuff like I am now.
Mhm.
When I first started contributing, I was basically like working on a lot of the libraries in standard library, specifically like the YAML library, and the nice thing about the things in the standard library is that they're mostly written in Ruby. So maybe there's a little bit of C, but it's mostly Ruby. So you don't have to be a C programmer to really join the core team. And I would say like I'm still not a good C programmer. I would say I was not a very good C programmer at the time. I've slightly improved a little bit over the years, but I was definitely not a good one.
Okay, so you're saying like anyone can join? Because I
Oh
feel
yeah.
I feel I don't know. Maybe it's just my impression is that contributing to Rails from anyone in the Ruby community tends to be easier than contributing to Ruby core. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely true. I think part of the reason is like Ruby core team uses a few different or uses different tools. So let's see. So for like the contribution process to Rails is super easy. You just send a pull request and like somebody will review it and merge it, hopefully.
Hmm.
Um, it used to be not the case with Ruby. Like you used to have to send it like post a patch to Redmine and then someone would review it and hopefully merge it in. But the process is like not very streamlined like it is with Rails on GitHub. But I think that's changing a bit now. Like you can send, if you want to contribute to Ruby, you can send a pull request on GitHub. Like it works. Go for it. I have several times I've clicked the merge button on GitHub and it works. But we don't use GitHub isn't our upstream. We
Hmm.
have our own Git server. But Kokoboon wrote a program that basically uh, puts the two together. So like if we merge onto GitHub, it automatically syncs over into our upstream repository. And it also goes in the other direction too. So if I push to the upstream repository, it'll automatically show up on GitHub. So yeah, the main thing that we can't do on GitHub is discuss like new language features. So if you want to
Hmm.
be involved in new language features, then you have to do it in Redmine. Whereas
Hmm.
on Rails, like we do all of our discussions on Red or on GitHub, basically.
And why do you think that distinction still exists? Is it just legacy reasons, or there's other concerns?
We have so on the Ruby core team, we have some folks who are really into open source, and I don't mean like free as in beer. I mean free as in freedom people.
Mm,
So they don't want to use GitHub because GitHub is a closed
got it,
source
got it, got it,
product.
got it.
So that's basically the reason.
Hmm. So speaking of GitHub, so the first time we met in person when we were here in Portugal, you were just had just joined GitHub, and now that we're talking again, you've just left GitHub. So that seems perfect. But what was that like? The transition, because you weren't before that. Were you at AT&T still before GitHub?
No, I was working for Red Hat
Red Hat,
before I
yeah,
worked for GitHub.
exactly.
Yep.
True. And then you moved to GitHub. So what was that like in terms of GitHub being one of the major Rails deployments in the world? I think.
Yeah.
What was the experience like of being in looking at the internals of that? I don't know if you were privy to them before you joined, but
I was not privy to them. It was interesting. I mean, the GitHub code base is like oh, it's a very big Rails application. I don't know what to say about it. It's like basically like any other like large Rails application that I've worked on in the past. It's That's all it is. I would not say it's anything special. How's that? I
yeah.
mean, of course, like it's got some special pieces,
Mhm.
but every large Rails application has some special pieces. I'm sure if you like any Rails app you've worked on that's of a certain age, you'll be
Mhm.
like, "Oh yes, this is a special thing."
But is there any particular takeaway that you took from? So, what was your job like at GitHub? Were you hired to specifically just improve Rails, or was it more like improve Rails, but also make sure it works with GitHub kind of thing?
When I was hired, I was hired to work on Ruby, and work on Rails so that it would work better for GitHub. But I would say like the job kind of changed a bit to the point where mainly I was focusing more on uh, application problems rather than upstream open
Hmm.
source issues. And that's kind of why I wanted to change.
Hmm.
Was I'd like to focus more on the open source aspects. Basically,
Hmm.
I wanted to dedicate more of my time to Ruby and Rails development, pretty much. Um,
And
but yeah,
so that's when you obviously moved to Shopify,
yeah.
just recently. So I don't know if you've had time to settle in yet. Um, but it is it's also another like large deploy of Rails. All like I don't know if there's any similarity between the code bases. I haven't seen any of them, but I'm sure there are some, and maybe even in the problems that they both face.
They both face similar problems. So far, so
Hmm.
this is my third week at Shopify.
So you're the best
So I
person to
wouldn't
answer,
say
obviously.
yeah, I wouldn't say I'm the best person to answer, but as my like looking through the being able to, I still have the GitHub code base fresh in my mind, fairly fresh in my mind, and then also like looking through the Shopify code base there, mm, not well. They're similar in some ways, but very different in other ways. But I'm like, it's really exciting to work on look at the code base of Shopify because Shopify handles like a lot of traffic, like a lot. And looking at the scaling, like basically trying to understand the scaling issues that come at play at that size is very interesting to me.
Hmm.
So I think it's fun, and I think like we can make improvements to Ruby and Rails that will like really impact high traffic websites. So I also think that those improvements will help other high traffic sites like GitHub as well. Well, they'll help everybody, but
Hmm.
you know what I mean.
Do you think that having like people like you that are in either both or just one of those core teams working in these companies is ultimately good for the community? The fact that you're able to see these problems and then push them upstream with all the solution of it.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely, for sure. I mean, we have so. I mean, Ruby is not Shopify's core product. Ruby was also neither, Ruby and Rails
Hmm.
are not our core products, but they absolutely impact our bottom line, and we make money using those tools. So having someone like me who can improve those and save money across all of our fleet is definitely impactful. Like one of the I'll give you an example from GitHub. When I was working at GitHub, one of the first improvements that I made was just a small improvement to the way that GC was tuned for for the GitHub application, and it saved us 10% CPU utilization across the entire thing. Like we no longer needed 10% of the computers we had anymore. Like they could just go away, which was really impactful
Yeah.
and good. And I think that that helps out. That doesn't just help the company; it also helps the community in general. So, being able to fix those things and push them upstream, I mean, it impacts a lot of people.
So you think more companies should do that, or do you see going into a slightly different topic here? Do you see that working for open source or being an open source contributor as a profession is that possible some other way?
Uh, so I think more companies should do what Shopify and GitHub are doing, like hire people to work on their core infrastructure. I think there's other ways. Of course, there are absolutely other ways for folks to make a living off of open source software. But fundamentally, I think what needs to happen is there has to be some way to make money off of that open source project. So, and that money drives payment to the open source developer. So, for example, like Shopify is making money off of Ruby and Rails, so it makes sense for them to invest in Ruby and Rails engineers. And I think the same thing is true with other libraries as well. So, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of a library. Let's say Nokogiri, for example. Many companies are using that, but it might not be making them enough money that they would warrant investing in one, like a dedicated engineer to work on something like that. And that's where I think things like GitHub sponsors can come into play, where it's like, okay, we can't afford to pay one person to work on these things, so but we can afford to pay like some amount through sponsorship. So the downside, I think, to that, like contrasting with my particular position, is that um, if you're not an employee, you can't know exactly what the bottlenecks are for the company, if that makes sense. Like, I know what is impacting Shopify and I can work to reduce those particular things. So I have a tighter relationship with the actual usage.
Sorry. Oops.
Oh,
sorry. My mic went out. Let me try to get this.
I hear you.
Yeah, I'll do it like this. I had it on the headphones, so I'll just do it like this. While I don't know, the AirPods seem to not be wanting to connect. It's just a thing that happens a lot to me lately.
Happens to me too.
I
don't know why.
Yeah, this is weird. Anyway, the question I had is, so when at least I first was aware of things like Ruby Together and other sponsor-like opportunities for open source, a question that a lot of people raised, or a concern, is that so some people might see this as paying per feature, or something like that. Is that a concern that you have?
Yeah, that concerns me too. Like I mean, if you have an open source project, you can run it, like go ahead and run it whatever way you want to. But I think it's like kind of sad to see, like, if you're going to sponsor me, we'll give you premium. We'll develop features specifically for you. It just seems like it muddies the water for motivation, right? It's clear that since I am a Shopify employee, when I am working on Ruby, it's very clear that my motivation is, my employer is Shopify. I am doing this specifically, like, where my interests are, right? It's very, very
Have
clear.
you ever had anyone contest any change that you proposed based on, this is too specific to GitHub or too specific to Shopify?
To Shopify, yeah. That's not happened to me. It's not happened to me before, but like, I think it's, I don't know. I personally wouldn't propose anything like that. If that makes sense. Like, of course, we have some changes that are like, yeah, this would be really great for us, but you have to look at the bigger picture and take the project into account and say, like, well, is this good for everybody, or is it just good for us? I mean, if it's just good for us, then maybe we'll release a fork, or we'll release a gem or some sort of extension like that. But that is absolutely a danger. And I don't really know a good way to protect against it. Or I don't know a great way to protect against it. I can tell you, like, let's say, for example, if you look at the Postgres team, most of the folks on the Postgres team are employed and they work on Postgres as I think many of them are consultants, but they all work for different people. And I think that contention prevents any one company from saying, like, I'm going to put this into the core. So I think that also helps people to kind of self-regulate, so they'll know like, if I propose this, people are going to say, oh, that's super specific to Shopify. No,
Right.
like you can kind of predict
Hmm.
that. So I think having a diverse group on the core team is very important.
Okay, so now in terms of what are you currently doing? Like, what's the most exciting thing you're now doing?
Yes, right now I'm focusing on garbage collection. So in Ruby 2.7, I made a worked for many years on a patch to add compaction support to Ruby. And for those that don't know what that is, it's basically like if you remember hard drive defragging, it's basically that, but for memory rather than your hard drive. So it just takes all of your memory and kind of like shuffles it together, so it's like compacted into one location. And I worked on a patch for that, and it's released in Ruby 2.7. But the issue is it's manual, so you have to say you have to manually say okay gc.compact, and it'll do it. But what I want to do is I want to change it so that it's automatic, so you don't need to do anything. It just does it.
Hmm.
Uh, so
What,
that you don't need to know about
what's
it.
the issue in running automatically? Because I'm sure there's some issue, otherwise you'd already have made it automatic.
Yeah, well, so I'll tell you a story about doing compaction. Like for a very long time, I thought that compaction was impossible. Like I didn't think it was possible to do in Ruby at all. Uh, and I was at Ruby Kaigi one year, and I was talking to one of the developers, Koichi, and I was like, "Well, it's impossible to do compaction." And he says to me, "Well, why is it impossible to do that?" And I was like, "I don't actually know why." I don't know why. And he's like, well, can you try it? And I'm like, oh, sure, I'll just try it and see what happens. So I did, and it turned out it was possible. The problem is it was just a lot of work, and that's the same issue with making the compactor automatic. Is it's possible, it just takes a lot of work. So I'm doing that work now. The main challenge now is like I don't know how technical you want to get,
As
but
technically as you want
all
to
right,
get.
let's let's do it. Let's do it. So right now, I actually have it working. Um, it does do automatic compaction, but there's an issue with it where um, there's a couple issues with it. The first issue is that it's not effective. So, like, what I mean by that is it'll compact everything, but actually, let me rewind a little bit. So let's say you have a whole bunch of objects in your system, and the compactor automatically runs. So it runs and everything is packed together, but then you free up any unused objects,
Hmm.
right? And as soon as that happens, you end up with a whole lot of holes in your heap, and that's exactly what the compactor is trying to prevent. And the scheme that I came up with for automatic compaction doesn't prevent those holes. It packs everything together, but it also packs objects that will be
Hmm.
freed, that will go away. So it takes garbage and compacts the garbage as well. And we don't want to do that. We want to get rid of the garbage and then compact everything. So that's one issue with the current implementation.
So you just make it
The
recursive
other
then.
issue, yeah. So what my plan to fix that is essentially like right now the GC has two phases. It does a mark and then it does a sweep. And right now I'm doing a mark and then a sweep and then a compact. Okay. And if you think about that, it sounds fine. Like you're like, okay, marks all the objects, sweep gets rid of any freed, gets rid of any garbage
Hmm.
objects. So there should be holes after the sweep, and then compact should compact everything
Yep.
together, right? The issue is that Ruby's GC is actually a concurrent garbage collector. So what happens is during the sweep phase, it doesn't just stop your program and then sweep everything. It sweeps a little bit and then lets your program run, and then sweeps a little bit, lets your program run, sweeps a little bit, and it keeps doing that until it's done sweeping,
Hmm.
right? The issue is that each time it lets your program run, your program is generating new garbage, right? So by the time the sweep phase is finished, there's already a whole bunch of garbage inside of your process. So then when the compactor runs, it compacts everything, but it also compacts that newly generated garbage. So we got to figure out a way to deal with that. And the way I'm going to deal with it is to combine the free step, so the sweep step, along with the compaction step. So it'll say like, okay, I'm going to free this object. At the same time, maybe I can just move something into that location.
Okay.
Right. So just combine those two steps.
That seems like, me not knowing anything about the internals, that seems like a re-architecture of the compactor. Probably, no?
Well, kind of. If you look at the code, like it's very. I split it up into different. I was able to split it up, so I have one main function that does the. I have one function that knows how to move things. So basically, you say, "Here's a source location and a destination location, and I just want you to move the source over to the destination." Okay. So there's one function you can call that'll just be like, "Okay, move the object." There's also another function that's like, okay, update all the references. So those things are independent of the actual algorithm. So there's a separate function which is an algorithm for determining which objects we should move around. So what I can do is basically during the free step, rather than just freeing the object, I can just go look for something else to put in there. So it's not a huge. I mean, it's not easy, but it's not a huge re-architecture.
You have the building blocks, and you need to glue them together in a different way, something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's your main work right now. Do you have an ETA for that?
That's my main work right now, and unfortunately, like we'll get more technical now. Unfortunately, I've found I guess I'd call it an Achilles heel, I suppose, of the system. So we talked about how during the free step, like it'll free some stuff, sweep some stuff, and then let your program run, and then sweep some stuff, and then let your program run. The way the compactor works, like for the longest time, people didn't think the compactor could work because of C extensions. And because C extensions hold raw pointers to some Ruby object, which means we can't let that Ruby object move around. Right. So we had to come up with a way to say like, okay, don't let that Ruby object move. The way we did that is we said, okay, when the C extension marks the Ruby object, that marks the object as unmovable. And if you want to have a C extension that allows movement, you need to use a different API. Okay. So the issue is that when a reference is written, like let's say we have A and B, if A points at B and A would pin B, we can't predict that. So we can't know that it would want it pinned. Mm-hmm. And essentially what this means is we can't make the compactor incremental. So we can't do like, okay, compact some stuff, let your program run, compact some stuff, let your program run. Right. And what that means is we would have to stop the world, compact everything, and then let your program run again, and it would introduce pause times to your programs. So I think I can get this working in the next, I don't know, few months or so. But I don't know if we want to have it. I don't know if we want it on by default because it'll impact performance.
Right. So it'll impact performance in terms of throughput, right? Something like that.
Yeah.
But do you think the benefit of having the freed up memory is good enough to overcome it, or it just depends?
Honestly, I don't know. Yeah, it just depends. I don't know. So I guess like what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish implementing it, and then we're going to test it to see how badly it impacts throughput. If it's not a big deal, like if it's fine, then we'll do it by default, or maybe we'll have a setting where you can say like, okay, do it automatically or not. Mm-hmm. But what I'm going to do after that is once we get this once we get this implemented, a way that we can make compaction like the reason we can't make compaction incremental like that is because Ruby doesn't have any read barriers. So I want to try introducing read barriers. And what a read barrier is a read barrier is just a bit of code that executes whenever a reference is read. So if like A references B, anytime A tries to read the B reference, we want to have some like a way to hook into that time, right? Right now, Ruby doesn't have any way to hook into that read. Because what you could do is if you could hook into that read, then during compaction, you could say like, oh, A is trying to read B, but I moved B around. So I'm going to tell like, oh no, I'm going to give you the right place to go, right? So we need that in order to make it incremental.
It seems like
So I'm going to try
it seems like you have well, you seems like you've been working on GC for a long time and you still have a long ways to go. Is that your plan? Is to become Ruby GC master forever? Is that?
I hope not. I don't know. I mean, I really like. I find the work incredibly interesting, and like the work is super fun and super interesting. But I don't know if I want to do it forever.
So that being said, you mentioned, and we mentioned this multiple times, that you're also a Rails contributor. So what kind do you
Yeah.
have a similar like big project in Rails, or you're more of a weekend contributor now to Rails?
I do a lot more like so. I guess what I try to focus on in Rails is I'm trying to focus on enabling other
Hmm.
contributors. So I basically what I do, my personal strategy is when I get tired of working on Ruby, I'll
Move
switch
to
over to
Rails.
Rails. And when I get tired of working on Rails, I'll switch over to Ruby. But lately I've been spending a lot more time on Ruby than I am on Rails. And what I'm trying to do is trying to help out I'm trying to help out other contributors to level up so that I can uh, I guess leverage them,
Hmm.
right? So I think that if I help out new contributors, they're going to become more productive, and hopefully, like I can be like, "This is an idea I would like you to do," and then they would go do it.
When you say when you
If
say
that
new
makes sense.
contributors, you mean like first commit to Rails, or new contributors as in new to the core team?
Both, a little bit of
Mm.
both. I mean, it depends. Like I'm trying to get more folks involved, get more people involved, and of the people who are involved, get them contributing more or get them contributing in um, I guess harder, like
Hmm.
re-architecture
Yeah.
ways, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Like,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say like not just like bug fixes or documentation, but fixing architecture
Yeah.
issues, underlying architectural issues.
Yeah, the reason I was asking is because, again, this is an assumption on my side, but I'm assuming that there's more new developers in general with less experience contributing to Rails than to Ruby, and also a lot more developers and a lot more pull requests and issues going to Rails than Ruby, because of the reasons we've discussed. Um,
Yeah.
so, like taking care of that, just going through issues, and I'm sure there's obviously bots that do some of the work, but um, I guess that's probably an important work as well in Rails, in any open source project.
Yeah. I guess I'm trying to. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to train my replacement. But the goal is to find like two replacements or more than one.
Okay,
Like it's got to be like a net increase, if you know what I
increase the
mean.
buzz factor.
Yes, exactly.
Um, yeah, so your work for Shopify, they let you decide what you want to do. Is that's the arrangement? I'm curious on how these things work, because I know like how it works when you go and work for a company and you work for the product of the company. But here it's kind of a side product that impacts the bottom line, as you're saying. Like, what's the arrangement
Yes.
like?
So they.
If you can share,
No, it's hard
obviously.
to say. Yeah, yeah. They. I. It's okay. I guess they let me decide on whatever I want to work on, but the issue is like I want to be useful to the business,
Hmm.
so I want to make sure that whatever I choose to work on is something that will impact the business. So like I mean, I'm not going to go off and work on like Node, for example, or some
Yeah.
unrelated project, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. So what I want to do, like what I'm trying to do is I want to take their code or take Shopify's code, make it faster, make it more efficient, and that's like I think that that's basically my mandate is to do that, and whatever projects fall out of that is the like so I guess I think of it kind of as a Venn diagram where Shopify wants their code to be faster and more efficient. I want Ruby to be faster and more efficient, but I also want that to be upstreamed and open source as
Right.
well. So where those things intersect is where I'm trying to
Got it.
focus.
Is any part of your job description also mentoring new developers or anything like that, or that's not something that goes either to you or your team, like in the Ruby? I don't know exactly the name of the team, but the Ruby team um, within Shopify.
I don't think it's a mandate
Hmm.
particularly, but I think it's a fun thing. Like it's a fun thing to do, and it also I don't know, it overall increases the quality of the code, the performance of the code, and like it's just a good thing to do and important to the business. So I don't know if it's a mandate
Hmm.
necessarily, but it's something that I like doing.
No, that makes sense. So shifting gears a little bit, one like where we originally met was at the conference, and you usually speak at and attend. I don't know if you attend other than speaking because you speak at so many conferences, but how's it been with this pandemic going on and not being able to actually be at conference? I saw that you gave a keynote to Couch RailsConf, but
Yeah,
how's that been?
it's uh so I mean before this pandemic I would travel like a lot. I would travel a
Hmm.
lot. So it was nice, like it was nice at first to just stay at home and like do, I'm like, oh, I don't have to be anywhere. I have nowhere to be. I can just be at home and do stuff, right? I think it's getting harder as time goes on. I think that's true for everybody. Like at first it's like, oh, okay, this is messed up and we can
Yep.
deal, right? But as time goes on, it's like, oh man, it's been a while.
Yep. And the
uh
expectation of staying like this for a while longer is also now becoming a realization, I think, for a lot of people.
yeah, so it's not like I don't know. It's not great, but I'm also a homebody. I like being at home and doing stuff around the house. And I've also been working from home since like 2008. So it's hard. I mean, it's hard, but I don't think I've had to adjust my life as much as other folks
Right.
have, right? So even though it's hard for me, I try to keep that in mind and keep that perspective.
And for you, having recently given a remote talk, do you think that remote conferences will become an option? Well, they kind of have to now if they are to exist. But do you think that uh, in the near future, like people like will get adapted to that, will start doing them more, or is it just a bad experience overall?
Uh, hmm. Let's see. I I honestly I don't know. I'd have to say like so RailsConf or Couch RailsConf was the first I guess like first remote one I've done really. And that one like I think the experience was good. I think the experience was probably good for attendees, I suppose. But for me as a presenter, it was like very, very hard because I had to spend a lot of time doing like video editing and like doing all this stuff that I don't
Hmm.
normally do. The other thing is like it's difficult to get it's difficult to get feedback. Like when I speak on stage, like I get feedback from the audience and I can tell, okay, that joke was okay. I can continue with more like ad-libbing and jokes.
Yeah.
But when you're doing a video, you can't, like, you don't have any of that feedback. Yesterday I actually gave a talk for the Boulder Ruby group, and I think that actually worked out a lot better because it was just completely done over Zoom, and I was able to say like, okay, um, if you have any questions, like just ask it and we'll have a discussion. So we were able to get feedback, and it was a lot more interactive. So I think just doing the videos, it lacks because we don't get to make the human connection. Whereas doing something live, you get that human connection.
Even live, at least in my experience, if you're presenting something and your screen is your presentation, you're basically talking to a computer, which is I don't know if you got that feeling as well.
Well, so my trick for that was I've got a monitor and I set up my computer next to me. So I had
Okay.
one display is what I shared, and then the other one was my presenter display, and I had the wall of Zoom faces on the side, so I could see everybody there. But you absolutely need two monitors
Right.
to do this. Like, it's a requirement.
That's been my experience. That's why I was asking. Um, okay, so lastly, the question or theme that I wanted to introduce into this talk is the home creation of things that you do. I was trying to put it in the more generic way. So not only electronic stuff that you work here and there, but you also make food in a different way than most people do it.
Yes.
You want to talk a little bit about
Yeah,
your
yeah.
passion there?
Sure, sure. Some of my hobbies, I guess one of my favorite hobbies is cooking. Like, I love cooking, but I like to do cooking that's hard, I guess. So one of my hobbies is to cure meats at home, and then I also do cheese making at
Hmm.
home as well. Um, and mainly I got into that. So I got into doing cured meats because, like, in the United States, it's pretty hard to buy good, like, high quality cured meats, and it's due to our uh, laws about food. Like, so if you buy, like, buying salamis and stuff, salamis, traditional ones, they're not cooked,
Hmm.
right? And in the U.S., like, we require that a lot of our food be cooked, so it's difficult to find traditional cured meats. So that's why I wanted to do it myself, was uh, like, so I could have the
Right.
real thing, right? Though I do think I think it's really funny because I made a talk, I made a talk about this, how to do this, like, cured meats at home, and I gave the talk in, like, I think Australia, and they actually have, like, really super good cured meats, like, you can just buy them at the
Hmm.
store. And I gave this whole talk, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you should go check out this place." I go check it out, and they have, like, amazing stuff that I can't buy here. And I'm like, if I lived here, I would not do this. I would just buy them. It's a lot of
So
work.
how likely do you think it is that you're gonna die from one of those?
Not
Not
likely.
likely.
It's not likely.
It's a safe
No.
process.
Well, it's not. So it's not a safe. It's definitely not a safe process. Actually, so I'm doing a lot more cheese making
Hmm.
recently, and that's a much safer process than doing meat curing. But when you do, like, so I don't think you I don't think you can die eating from the like eating cheeses, like homemade
Yeah.
cheeses. I don't think there's, like, a one that will kill
Hmm.
you. But making, like, home cured meats, for sure, like, you can, if you eat it, you could die. But it's like there's a lot of preventative measures, and also, like, I've had them go bad, and it's, like, super
Okay.
obvious. It's like you get it and you're like, "Oh wow, this smells bad and looks bad. I should not eat this." So you don't. And it's okay.
So and how do you decide to get into cheese? That's like a new venture for you, right?
Yeah, I started getting into cheese because why did I get into cheese? Well, I had a coworker. Um, I just decided like I just wanted to do it one of these days. Oh, okay. The basis of my meat and cheese curing is because I wanted to do something illegal.
Okay, that sounds about right.
So you can't like selling uncured meats is like it's or uncooked meats, it's illegal, right? And I'm like, oh, I want some of that. I want some of that illegal food. It's got to be better,
Some
right?
moonshine sometime, maybe.
Yeah. Another thing is like it's very difficult to buy um like if you go buy cheeses at the store, cheeses that are made in the United States, they're all made with pasteurized
Hmm.
milk. Uh and it's really funny like you can buy cheeses made from unpasteurized milk, but they're all imported. Like we can buy like French cheese and stuff, but and those French cheeses are not pasteurized. Like the milk's not pasteurized, but there's none like no US
Hmm.
made cheeses that are that way. So I wanted to try doing that as well. So I had to like figure out a place to source milk, like who am I going to buy unpasteurized milk from? Because that's like a very gray market thing. Um, so that's where I started doing this. It's like I gotta try these illegal foods.
And are they any good so far? What has been like edible?
I've never eaten any of it. I haven't eaten any. So uh I have to make I'm making
Okay.
cheddars. I'm making these hard cheeses and they have to like age for maybe a year or
Oh, okay.
so. Uh so like I've just been making them. You can age cheddar for the books according to the books, like you can do from 3 months up to a year. Well, really as long as you want to, but 3 months is the
Hmm.
minimum. And I don't know like which one is best, right? So I decided what I would do is I'm gonna make one each month,
Okay.
and
Try it out.
then when the oldest one is a year old, then I'll have like one from each month back, and then I can try them all at the same time and have like a taste test and figure out which ones I like better.
Okay.
And I was planning on having a cheese party because I've got like I think almost 20 kilograms of cheese
that's,
in my
that's a lot.
yes.
That's so much cheese.
Yes, in my basement I have so much cheese. So what I was gonna do is have a party and have everybody like a friend of mine is uh he's a psychology professor, and he has to teach his students how to do surveys. And he came to town one time, and I was telling him about this experiment. I was like, I'm going to have all these, and I'm going to have a whole bunch of people come over, and we're all going to do
Hmm.
taste tests on them, and I'm going to like do it. And he told me the correct way to do blind taste tests with all the people and how to collect results. Um, like one example is when you survey people and you give them options, don't use numbers. So like don't say sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, because people will associate the numbers with like how good it is. They'll think that sample 1 tastes
Hmm.
better than sample 3 because it's number
So how do
1. So you
use
have to
letters?
use letters. Yeah, use letters. And then what I'm going to have them do is I'm gonna use letters and then have everybody rank them to say like, okay, just put them in order of which one
Hmm.
you like best. Anyway, I'm gonna send him all the data, and he's gonna use it in his classes to teach.
How far along are you in that like 1 year process?
Yeah, this is actually kind of the sad part. Like, I'll hit 1 year next month,
Oh,
so I was planning on having the cheese party in June. But I don't know if that's gonna happen now.
right.
So I guess what I'm gonna do is basically just keep making one every month until the pandemic is over, and then
You
have
have
a
to
huge
invite the
cheese party.
entirety of Seattle to eat that amount of cheese.
Yes, It's kind of sad though, because I'm making the cheese and it's like when I'm making it, it smells really good. Like it smells so good, but like I can't eat any of it.
It's for the advancement of science, so
Yes,
well worth it.
exactly.
Anyway, Aaron, we've hit our hour mark, and I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time for have this very informal chat. And
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was really fun.
No problem. So again, thank you, and we'll talk a little bit later. And before we wrap this up, I'm gonna go to me again. So everyone, that was another edition of Subvisual Live Talks. Again, next week at the same time, we'll be live. Join us with a new guest that I think is gonna be very fun as well. So see you guys next week. Goodbye.